Please, don't take the cloth off, she begged. What forced a woman over 50 years old to beg so desperately? How many humiliations, how many wounds from the past have she only known to hide in fear? And then, when a rancher sees the truth hidden under that cloth, will her life fall into tragedy again or begin a new chapter of love and hope? The train groaned to a halt at the edge of nowhere, its wheels sighing like tired lungs. Clara stepped down, carpetbag in hand, her back straighter than her heart felt. At 50, she knew how to wear composure like armor, though her wrist bore the truth beneath layers of cloth. The long sleeves she clutched so tightly were not for modesty, but for concealment. The depot at Dry Creek was little more than splintered wood and wind, yet it was the beginning of another chapter she had not written for herself. Her family had written it, sent away as a mail-order bride, not out of love, but of shame and convenience. Too many whispers had followed her, too many cruel eyes. It was easier for them to pack her into a letter than to face her presence each day. At the far end of the platform stood Thomas, a rancher weathered by sun and solitude. His hat was in his hand, not out of gallantry, but a kind of reverence, as if he understood weariness when he saw it. "You must be Clara," he said quietly. She nodded. Her voice faltered, so she did not use it. The buggy ride stretched under a sky that seemed too wide for confession. Clara sat rigid, her sleeves tugged down, her hands clasped. She had promised herself no one would see. No one would ask. But the prairie wind had a way of prying, of loosening what people bound too tight. When the wagon hit a rut, her sleeve slipped just an inch. Enough for Thomas to notice the edge of cloth stained darker than it should be. He said nothing, only held the reins steady. At supper, when he set a bowl of stew in front of her, she kept her gaze lowered. But he did not look away. His eyes lingered, not on the cloth, but on the tremor of her hands. It was then she whispered, half to herself, half to him, "Please, don't take the cloth off." His hand stilled on the table. He did not press. He simply nodded the way a man nods to a wounded animal, promising patience instead of pressure. That night in the quiet of the ranch house, Clara lay awake. She knew the cloth could not hold forever. The question was, when it fell, would mercy or judgment be waiting? She had crossed miles to escape the voices of shame, but could she outrun the scars stitched into her skin? The mornings at Thomas's ranch began before the first hint of light touched the horizon. The rooster crowed, coyotes retreated, and the wind carried the smell of sage and smoke. Clara rose quietly, her body stiff from the narrow bed, her sleeves pulled down with the same care as a soldier handling a loaded pistol. She cooked in silence, her hands moving with practiced steadiness, chopping, stirring, kneading, as though labor could muffle the thoughts pressing at the edges of her mind. Each clang of the skillet felt like an answer to the doubts that whispered, "You don't belong here. You never did." Thomas watched her from the doorway, not as a man claiming ownership of a bride delivered to him, but as someone reading a language written in the way she stood upright, yet brittle, as if she'd learned too many times that leaning on anyone was dangerous. He didn't say much, but when he did, it was always measured soft like the creak of wood. "You don't have to cook if you don't want to," he said one morning, his voice breaking the silence as steam rose from the pot. "I need to keep busy," she replied, her eyes fixed on the bubbling stew. "Busy is one thing," he said gently, "but you don't have to prove yourself here." The words caught in her chest, because proving herself had been the currency of her entire life, proving she could work, endure, obey, survive. Yet in his tone there was no demand, only recognition, as though he had seen his own reflection in her burden. Later that day, while carrying a pail of water, Clara stumbled. The hem of her skirt snagged, the pail tipped, and in the struggle her sleeve rolled up past her elbow. The mark showed raised, jagged scars running like cruel signatures across her skin. Thomas froze. His breath hitched, not from disgust, but from something heavier, rage at the faceless cruelty, sorrow at the pain she had carried alone. His eyes burned, yet his voice stayed steady. "You don't have to hide them from me," he said quietly. But Clara pulled the sleeve back down with trembling hands, her jaw set like stone. "They're not for anyone to see," she whispered. He didn't press. He simply picked up the pail, poured the remaining water into the trough, and stood beside her. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It held the weight of something unspoken, something that could grow if given time. That night by the fire, Thomas laid an extra log into the flames. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't mention the scars. Instead, he said, "The land's hard. It leaves its mark on all of us. Some scars show on the outside, some don't. Doesn't make one heavier than the other." Clara looked at him, then truly looked. And for the first time in years, she wondered if perhaps she had not been sent here to disappear, but to be seen. The cloth was slipping, and with it the fear she had worn like armor. But could she trust a man to hold her truth without breaking it? The prairie had a way of unearthing truth the same way storms unearthed roots. Sudden, brutal, unavoidable. It was near dusk when Clara returned from the chicken coop, the gathering basket pressed close to her side. A neighbor woman, sharp-tongued and curious, had stopped by earlier. She'd spoken freely in the yard, her voice pitched loud enough for anyone passing to hear. "So you're the new one, are you? Folks said Thomas took in a bride. Didn't think he'd bring home one, so—" Her eyes flicked over Clara's frame, then narrowed. "Damaged." The word clung to Clara like burrs on wool. She had smiled faintly, answered nothing, and carried on. But inside she was unraveling. That night as the fire crackled low, Thomas noticed how her hands shook while mending a torn shirt. "What happened?" he asked gently. Clara didn't answer. Her lips pressed thin. Finally she set the needle aside, rose, and stood near the window. Moonlight touched the curve of her face, the shadows deepening the lines carved by years of silent battles. "You don't know what they called me," she whispered her back to him. "What they did. My family, my husband before. When I didn't obey fast enough, when I was too loud or too quiet or simply myself, they used me up. And when there was nothing left to take, they marked me so I'd never forget what I was to them." Her hand went to her arm, gripping where the scars lay hidden. Thomas rose slowly, his boots careful on the wood, as though approaching a skittish colt. "And what do you think you are now?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "Nothing but reminders. That's why I keep the cloth on. It's easier if no one sees what I became." The words spilled like water breaking through a dam. Years of shame, silence, endurance, all poured into the stillness of that room. And when she turned, her eyes shone with both fury and fear. "Don't you dare pity me, Thomas," she said, her voice shaking. "I've lived too long as someone else's shame. I won't live as yours." For a long moment he said nothing. Then with a steadiness that wrapped around her storm like a rope around a wild steer, he answered, "I don't pity you, Clara. I honor you for still standing, for still cooking, still mending, still being here when you had every reason to give up. Scars don't make you less. They tell me you survived what should have broken you." Her breath hitched. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. Belief could betray. She turned away again, folding her arms tight as if to hold herself together. The fire popped. Silence stretched. And in that silence, Clara realized the cruelest battle was not with Thomas or the neighbors or even her past, it was with herself. Could she ever let herself unclench the fist she'd carried inside for half a lifetime and trust that this man wouldn't let go? The days stretched thin with routine. Clara cooked, mended, swept, and tended the small garden near the porch. To an outsider, it looked like any quiet life on the frontier. But beneath her long sleeves and guarded silences, storms still gathered. One evening the air hung heavy with rain. The sky bruised purple and wind rattled the shutters as Thomas came in from the barn carrying the smell of horses and dust. He found Clara at the table, kneading dough with her head bowed. "Storm's coming," he said softly. She only nodded. When the thunder cracked overhead, Clara startled. The wooden spoon slipped from her flour-dusted hand, clattering across the floor. Instinctively, Thomas bent to pick it up, yet his hand brushed her sleeve in the process. The fabric slipped just enough for him to see. A jagged welt, the kind no accident could make. Raised, puckered cruelly, deliberate. Clara gasped, pulling back violently. Her elbow knocked the dough bowl to the floor, flour clouding the air like smoke. She clutched her sleeve with both hands, breath ragged. "I told you not to look," she whispered almost to herself. Thomas froze where he stood. His eyes, wide with shock, softened instead of hardening. His voice, when it came, was steady as rain on a roof. "Clara, who did this to you?" Her lips trembled. Tears welled, spilling down her cheeks. She sank into the chair, covering her face with both hands. "They branded me," she choked. "Said I was theirs to control. A reminder that I was ruined. That no one would ever want me again." Silence filled the room except for the thunder rolling outside. Thomas stepped closer slow, as if approaching a wounded bird. He knelt not towering above, but meeting her at eye level. Gently, carefully, he reached for her wrists. "Let me see." She shook her head violently. "No, please. You'll despise me like they all did." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he laid his rough hand palm up on the table, waiting. The same way one waits for a wild horse to decide if it will trust. Minutes passed before Clara's strength faltered, and she let her sleeve fall. Thomas's breath hitched. His eyes glistened. He did not recoil. Instead, his calloused fingers traced the scar not as a wound, but as if it were proof of her survival. His voice broke as he whispered, "They hurt you, but they didn't win. You're still here, and you're more than what they tried to mark into you." Clara wept openly, the storm outside echoing the storm inside her chest. For the first time, she let herself cry without shame, her sobs shaking the walls of her silence. Could this moment of raw truth become the bridge between shame and love? Or would Clara retreat once more behind her walls? The storm passed, leaving the earth drenched and the sky washed clean. But inside the little cabin, something else had shifted, something that could not be undone. For days after that night, Clara moved differently. Her steps were still quiet, but no longer furtive. She carried the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in decades. Yet with it came a trembling fear. What now? Thomas didn't press her. He never mentioned the scar again, never asked for stories she wasn't ready to tell. Instead, he showed his knowing in small gestures, leaving a shawl draped across her chair. When mornings grew cold, splitting wood earlier, so she wouldn't have to strain fixing the shutter she once struggled with in silence. Each act whispered, "You are safe here." But safety was a foreign land to Clara. One morning while hanging laundry, she felt the echo of her past rise like a ghost. A neighbor woman, sharp-eyed and gossipy, passed by with her daughter. They slowed, staring at Clara's rounded figure, her graying hair tucked beneath a scarf. Whispered laughter drifted on the breeze, cruel, dismissive. The old shame rose hot and choking. Clara dropped the wet sheet into the dirt and nearly fled back inside. But then Thomas's voice cut through calm and steady. "Morning, ladies." The women stiffened at his tone, firm, protective. Thomas walked to Clara's side, not as her rescuer, but as her equal. He lifted the sheet from the ground, shook off the dust, and together they pinned it back on the line. His hand brushed hers, deliberate, claiming nothing, yet offering everything. The neighbors left in silence. Clara's chest tightened. For years she had borne humiliation alone, believing it her lot in life. But now, someone had chosen to stand with her in the open without shame. That night by the fire, she found her voice at last. "Thomas," she said softly, "I thought scars meant I was broken beyond mending. But today when you stood by me, I felt something I'd forgotten. Dignity." He turned, eyes steady. "Clara, scars don't mean you're broken. They mean you've lived through what should have ended you, and you're still standing. That's strength. That's beauty." Her breath caught not in pain but in release. For the first time in years, she let herself believe his words. And in that belief, a chain within her snapped. Could dignity truly become the seed of love, or would Clara's fears rise again to choke it before it bloomed? The prairie wind had a way of carrying news faster than horses. By the time autumn's first frost lay silver across the grass, whispers had already made their way into town. That mail-order bride, the heavy one, she's living with Thomas Whitaker now. They say she hides scars under her clothes, not fit to be anyone's wife, let alone his. The words slithered back to the ranch in pieces like poison on the wind. Clara heard them from a merchant's wife at the dry goods store. The woman didn't mean harm, or so she claimed, yet every syllable cut Clara open. That night she sat by the hearth with her sewing basket untouched, her hands stiff and trembling. When Thomas came in from the barn, he saw the storm in her eyes. "Tell me," he said gently. She tried to shake her head, but the tears betrayed her. "They're laughing at me again. At us. They think you're a fool for choosing me." And maybe her voice broke. Maybe they're right. Thomas's chair scraped as he stood. He crossed the room not with anger, but with a steady, deliberate weight. Kneeling before her, he placed his calloused hand over hers. "Clara," he said, voice low, "I didn't bring you here to silence gossip. I brought you because this place felt empty without you. Let them talk. The only voices that matter are right here. He pressed her hand to his chest, then guided it to her own. And here, her breath shuddered. For years she had braced herself for abandonment, for cruelty disguised as love. Yet this man's eyes held no mockery, only a fierce tenderness. Still, the test wasn't done. Days later, while Thomas was in town buying seed, a figure from Clara's past arrived at the ranch, her estranged brother, the one who had once auctioned her dignity for a dowry she never saw. He looked older, sharper around the edges, but his words stung just the same. So it's true. You're still clinging to scraps of worth. Does he know what you are, Clara? Does he know how far you've fallen? Clara's knees nearly gave way, but something in her had shifted since the day Thomas stood beside her at the laundry line. She steadied herself and replied, voice quiet but firm, "He knows who I am," and he stayed. Behind her she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Thomas had returned sooner than expected. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her brother. "You've said enough," Thomas said, his voice even, but edged with steel. The man scoffed, muttered a curse, and retreated toward the road. Clara's heart pounded, but this time it was not from shame. It was from the strength of having someone stand shoulder to shoulder with her, refusing to let the past own her anymore. That night under a prairie sky dusted with stars, Clara whispered, "For the first time, I don't feel alone in the fight." Thomas reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the back of it like a vow. "That's because you never will be again." With her past silenced and Thomas by her side, could Clara finally step into the freedom of love she thought was never hers to claim? Winter settled slowly over the valley, wrapping the world in white. On mornings when the frost clung heavy to the window panes, Clara would stoke the fire, while Thomas carried in wood, their movements as natural as the ticking of a clock. There was no ceremony in their togetherness, no grand declarations, only the steady rhythm of shared days where silence no longer meant loneliness, but comfort. One evening after supper, Thomas pulled a small box from his coat. He set it on the table between them without flourish, his rough hands trembling just slightly. Inside lay a simple silver band, nothing more, nothing less. "I don't have fine words, Clara," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "But I do know this, the ranch, the children, even my own breath, they're all steadier with you here. I don't want you to feel owned. I want you to feel chosen. Will you stay, not because you must, but because you want to?" Clara's eyes welled the firelight, catching tears that shimmered like glass. For decades she had carried the weight of rejection, of being measured by size, by scars, by silence. But here in this small ranch kitchen, with the snow falling soft outside, she felt lighter than she ever had. "Yes," she whispered, her hand covering his. "Not because I must, because I finally can." Thomas slid the ring onto her finger, and together they sat by the fire, listening to the quiet hum of the prairie night. Outside, the wind swept gently over the land, as if blessing their new beginning. Clara thought of the years she had lost, then let them go. Love had not come in her youth, nor in beauty, nor in perfection. It had come here late and tender, in the steadfast heart of a man who saw her for all she truly was. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe she was not just surviving, but truly home. After a lifetime of silence and scars, Clara found not pity, but partnership, not ownership, but choice. Could love discovered so late shine even brighter than the loves lost before? In the end, her scars were not the end of her story. They were the beginning of one worth telling. For years she had been taught to hide, to shrink, to believe her worth ended where her wounds began. But when the rancher lifted that cloth and trembled not with disgust but with reverence, she learned something she had been denied all her life, that love does not turn away from brokenness. It leans closer. And so the woman who once begged only to survive discovered that she could live fully, freely, tenderly. The man who thought he had nothing left to give realized that choosing kindness was the strongest thing he could do. Together they built a home not out of perfection, but out of presence. Friends, perhaps that is the quiet lesson for us all. We do not need to erase our scars to be worthy of love. What matters is finding those who will look at us, bruises and all, and still say, "You are enough." If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, for more tales of resilience, late blooming love, and the quiet strength of second chances. Share this story with someone who needs hope today, and let us know in the comments, would you like to see what happened next in their life together? Or hear more stories of healing and unexpected love on the frontier? We read every word you write, and perhaps your story is waiting to be told next.